Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Laura and I'm joined by Antonia and Ellie to talk about the internet and whether we can learn absolutely anything from it. And this is a milestone episode for us. It's our 100th one. So we'd really like to thank you all for listening. In all the years we've been doing this podcast, we've covered a whole different range of science and engineering topics. We thought for this milestone episode that talking about this particular thing was particularly relevant because it kind of fits with how we found some of our information for the podcast over the years. So it's quite relevant. So, Antonia, start with you. What have you got to say about this?
So this topic I wanted to bring up because I heard a very extreme case of you can learn anything on the internet. Whether you should or not is another problem. People were exposing military secrets, specific design components about military aircraft or military vehicles because they wanted to prove some knowledge that they had to get clout about gaming.
Okay, that is a very odd reason for breaking what I assume is the Official Secrets Act or whatever the equivalent is from their country.
Yes, so in this case, this was from the US Army's knowledge base. Yeah, it was shared in a forum that you do have to join in a group, but it could go elsewhere, couldn't it?
So they were sort of talking about this game that they were playing, and someone said, I don't believe the plane in the game should be able to do that. And then someone was like, well, actually, in real life, I have all this knowledge from the army, and it can or can't do that. That seems a very quick way to get fired.
Yeah.
And it's not the only time it's happened.
You can imagine that there's a very good reason that information isn't just like out in the wild for all to see. Ellie, you kind of summed it up quite nicely there. I guess your science communication background might offer some insight into what the internet can or maybe can't tell us.
Yeah, it's funny in terms of science communication because I can tell you what I know, or I receive papers from researchers and then I can break it down for you and tell you what I know. So you can learn that sort of thing on the internet. And also at work we have this special component of one of our email newsletters called We Have Answers. So if you've got those funny shower thoughts that a lot of people have, like why do my fingers go wrinkly in the bath, or what animal has the most valuable blood, stuff like that. We've got answers. We can explain things. We've thought of these weird things that you can learn, which is quite fun.
How do you put a value on animal blood?
Oh, Laura, I've got the article for you.
This is not a thing I've ever thought about, by the way. It's not the kind of research that I've done working with blood products, but...
No.
Do you want me to spoil it for you, or do you want to read the article?
I feel like I have to know now. Go on, tell me.
It's the horseshoe crab.
And why is it so valuable?
Basically, they have blue blood, which is quite hard to say, and it's super important in the creation of vaccines.
Oh.
Because it's copper rich, that makes it icy blue colour, and they've got different ways of fighting infection and stuff. They don't have white blood cells. They have different cells that detect bacterial, toxins.
Oh, okay, well now I want to know even more, but I feel like I might get so distracted by that we stop talking about things the internet can tell us.
But that just proves you can learn anything on the internet, like on this podcast.
Maybe. I don't know if you can learn absolutely anything, though. I mean, there must be things that the internet doesn't know, right?
But there's also a whole host of available information. I suppose that has to be relevant to someone else.
I guess it depends what you want to learn. I've used the wealth of the internet many times to learn stuff video editing or Photoshop hacks, or if you want to do something in a program. I guess it's a bit like the video games in that someone's probably done it before, so you type it into Google and a handy little video comes up from YouTube that says, oh, you want to make something black and white in Photoshop. These are the buttons you need to press in the order that you need to press them.
It's true. You can find a lot of things. I've used it to search up how to use different Excel formulas and then remind myself how to use those Excel formulas because I've forgotten. But sometimes there are too many different options. Someone's written 5 different ways to do it and you realise actually none of them are exactly what I was searching for, and sometimes it's just better to learn from someone else who has experience. You talk about Photoshop. I remember struggling a lot with using Photoshop and another Adobe program for photo editing. And then I just did a 1 hour session with someone else in the photography society. That taught me everything that I needed to know for a long time.
I guess people have different learning styles, right? Like, some people learn better face to face, having someone sat next to you to explain it to you can work for some people much better than like just watching a video and copying what they're doing. I mean, am I even really learning it, or am I just temporarily gaining knowledge to fix that problem? Like, will I remember that in the future? Maybe, maybe not.
That's a learning model though, isn't it? That you have different ways to grade how much you've learned something. First is like memorization, being able to copy, and then being able to teach and explain it to someone else is like top tier.
I could probably explain it to someone else now, but only because I've learnt it off the YouTube video.
See, one day you want to teach one, to parrot a phrase from Grey's
Grey's
Anatomy.
Anatomy. I don't think if I saw one, learnt one, teach one, I could do, what do they always do, appendectomies or stuff like that?
No, definitely not. I find that, I'm assuming they're abridging some useful thing that surgeons do to learn. I think if you did one, surely you then can't teach one. Surely.
But you need that physical practice,
Yeah.
I suppose. Like just having watched someone.
Yeah, but only doing it once. I think, yeah, practice is key.
Don't people get overconfident though? I presume that you couldn't learn how to do an appendectomy from the internet, but you could probably watch a video of one. But then people get confident and they learn like how to fly a plane. Like the simulation things are mind blowing to me. And then people go off on like mad joints, like joyrides, and try and steal planes from airports and like convince that they can fly them because they've done it online on these video games.
I suppose that's where that military secret came into use, is like how realistic is the simulation.
Yeah.
If you had all the computing power that you could simulate it, and there's examples where people have used games to train people for real jobs.
I've always struggled a bit with gaming, and I think part of it is because you don't get that physical feedback. You're sitting in a static room looking at a screen. Like those games, like if you playing Ultimate Frisbee or something, or some game where you have to get a frisbee into a net and you have different courses and it gradually gets harder.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at that.
Frisbee golf.
Yeah, because just putting your hand in a different position and seeing the thing on the screen isn't the same as doing it in real life. So I instantly get bored and fed up.
Yeah, I guess it probably can't teach you like physically how to hold a frisbee, or like maybe it could teach you how to play a song, but if your technique for like how you hold your hands on the guitar is wrong, then maybe you're going to struggle.
Yeah, I find it really useful for like how to do something to like mechanically fix a push bike. I don't remember it necessarily unless I do it a lot, but it's really useful for I have this one specific problem. Someone has shown me how to fix it. Great, move on.
Oh, Chris is always watching videos of like how to replace your tyres when they have a puncture, or how to like get the rims back over. Always a massive faff.
But wouldn't it be better if someone was just there to tell you like how much pressure to apply?
Well,
Or to do it for you, because I'm terrible.
I'd rather figure those things out myself, I think, because it's too much pressure having someone watching me knowing that I'm going to do something wrong.
That's true. Could be quite judgy.
Yes. And a good teacher shouldn't be judgy, right? Getting it wrong is part of how you figure out how to do it right, and they should support that. It depends on what kind of teacher they are, I suppose.
But I guess like the point of like having someone with experiences, if they're a good teacher, they might be able to sort of adjust things in a way that doesn't give you bad feedback, that they could see you're about to make a mistake that is irreversible. They can stop you.
Yeah. But I'm the sort of person that would be quite cautious and think if I am definitely going to break this, I will just take it to someone else to fix.
Yeah, I would probably do that too.
Yeah, I guess it depends what it is. I mean, I prefer reading a lot of stuff as well to watching videos. Obviously, I'm not going to read how to fix my bike when it's easier to see someone doing it. But learning about really esoteric science, say, or something that's not in my field, reading a textbook or some research papers, I often find more useful than listening to a video or listening to a podcast. I wonder if maybe that brings us on to things that maybe you can't learn, because if that's the practical stuff, there's learning about science or engineering that's a little bit different. I can't think of a very good example from my own career at the minute, but Ellie, can you think of something where it's been useful? Talk to a scientist or read some background information on your science communication stuff.
It's quite tricky because unless you have a base knowledge, it's always going to be harder, right? And often I write stuff that I don't necessarily know the full ins and outs. So often I will speak to researchers and go straight to the source of whoever's written a paper and say, just tell me how it started. That's my favourite question to ask someone. How did you get to this point where you thought, I'm going to write a paper about this? Because often that is the context that I'm missing. because I don't know why they even thought to do that in the first place.
Sort of like, what makes it special?
Yeah, or just how did you come up with this? Like, were you out on a walk one day and you saw a frog and you thought, why is it up a tree? Or, like, just how did you get here? And then I can dig into the details. Okay, well then this is why you wanted to find out what you wanted to find out. How did you do it? What was the experiment? What are the results? All the rest of it.
But I guess reading their research paper online was a starting point for that conversation. It gave you enough information to then go and ask them some intelligent questions.
Oh, hopefully that's what I strive for. But there's also, I guess if you're trying to learn anything on the internet, you can also use tools like ChatGPT and AI and all of that sort of thing to make it a bit easier for you. They're very good language models that break down scientific papers and stuff like that.
I would treat those with a bit of caution, though. I've seen instances where someone has put some very sensible text into an AI to then summarize it in a slightly different way, and it's gotten the phrasing very slightly wrong, so it hasn't actually made sense.
I guess that's a good thing about having copy checkers, is that hopefully at least what I'm writing makes sense to at least one or two other people.
Yeah, and I still think you need an expert to check the facts. I think that's very important. I have an example from some of the conservation work that I've done. There's a plant, it's called yellow rattle or yellow flag. It drops its seeds at the end of the summer, and the plant itself actually feeds off grass, so it helps suppress the growth of grass. It's a parasitic plant, and it's really useful in conservation because then you can help create wildflower meadows because they don't like having a lot of grass around. So I wanted to know exactly how long does it take for this yellow rattle to go into seed over winter, because it needs to be below a particular temperature for a particular amount of time. Everything online just said sow it for at least 4 months over winter. It needs a period of cold. And nothing I could find would give me the specific information I was looking for. It was like they'd all used one source of information and then just rehashed it in a different way to come up with some waffly, woolly stuff that was really unsatisfying.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's funny as well because we get obviously press releases that then everyone else gets. So like the Guardian or the Independent or whoever gets the same information. So there is only so many ways that you can say, X, Y, and Z is released, and then everyone's looking for the hook or the angle that makes it slightly different from everyone else.
Or you have to have some specific knowledge to add yourself.
Exactly, or just go to the researcher as you might have done, or I would do, and ask them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did find the answer in a research paper, finally. It was 8 weeks at 4 degrees Celsius when they did experiments in the lab. That's what it took for the plant to germinate.
You should publish that, Laura.
No, it's already been published.
Oh, write it in a forum so everyone can access it.
Yeah, it did take me a while to find that, and it was quite a lot of effort to dig and find a summary because I couldn't access the entire journal article. So yeah, I think maybe it would be useful for people to have that information out there.
Yeah,
so
those general pieces of information works in general, but when we have like weird seasonal changes, you can't apply that because we're getting slightly warmer weather for winter or exaggerated other seasons. So having that specific information is so useful.
Exactly. What if we then end up having to germinate all yellow rattle in an artificial environment because the winter temperatures are too warm?
Yeah, it could come to that. That's not unlikely.
So that is something that frustrates me as well, is like not only just everyone writing an article based on the same source information, which was a press release, which generally has like some key facts, and then what I find is just a lot of waffle in the rest of the article. Is when people are generating new articles to stay on top of the search engine optimizers. So they are rewriting articles that already exist and not necessarily going back to the original source material. So it's like second or third, fourth hand information by that point.
This is tricky for me because this is sometimes part of what I do, is that we write articles to be at the top of, search engines. Like that's what we're trying to get, that first place on Google. It depends what you're writing about, but a lot of the information is already out there. So I'm trying to write it in a way that is engaging and different and will also hit certain criteria to means that Google will like it and therefore put it higher up. I try and go back to things like research papers, I guess, is the most obvious one. I guess they're the primary sources of what we know about. Usually it's animals that I write about.
Because you're a zoologist, so you've got the background.
Because I'm a zoologist, so why, why wouldn't I?
Makes sense, yeah.
It doesn't mean that information is not already out there, I suppose. It's just presented in a different way.
I have this exact problem at work. In my job, trying to make things more energy efficient and giving my advice to companies, the information is largely out there. So again, I'm just bringing that information into one place for them to make decisions or actually put into action plans. Some of the information is 20 years old or before. Where do I find the original information? It's just experience that people had published in an article. And then because we're all companies, we don't actually share sources because we want to make it seem like we found that out ourselves.
Oh, so you sort of you've got your own sort of proprietary database of information that no one else can see.
But also it's different as well because you're a business, right? You're trying to, make money at the end of the day. You want people to pay for your expertise. So regardless of if the information is elsewhere, it's worth it for the company that wants to employ you to go straight to you because you're making it, nice and accessible for them.
I guess it's also a shortcut. Like, they don't have to read everything that is not necessarily exactly what is relevant to them.
Yeah, it's just easier, and I guess time is money, right? So it's worth it to pay for you to do that than for them to sit for hours reading all the things that they could.
Yeah. It's just something that I find interesting, that, like, some of the work that I do is not that novel. Yet it is still not done, so I guess there's a value in what I do by regurgitating information.
That's why you get paid, right?
Apparently so.
Sounds like we're all in a similar sort of business. We all kind of synthesize information in a particular way for a particular audience that they can take in because it matches either some need of theirs or some particular way of learning something.
I think so. It is like reframing the information or pulling out more useful information to help whatever need they have. Usually for me, it's decision making.
Yeah, and I guess you said a lot of this information is out there anyway, but presumably you go to a reputable source for that information. You don't find, this article that Joe Bloggs wrote on Medium when they don't have the background in whatever that article is meant to be about and then trust it. You look at it and go, well, this isn't your background, so I think you've got that information from somewhere else. I'm not entirely sure that I trust that you've understood it.
Yeah, so in my case, I use industry sources, whether they're suppliers of equipment, they say the best case scenario, so then you kind of find other energy managers' experiences. Yeah, so it's a bit of a mix of people with the right experience, like you said, information that is put there from someone, and then seeing how much they overlap or how much they don't overlap.
Yeah, so you make your judgment on knowing what is a reputable source and what isn't.
Yeah.
I guess, Ellie, it must be the same for you in your job. You must have people like, fact checkers and people that make sure that what you've written does match what the original research article said.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that I write is copy checked and fact checked by at least one editor. And it's interesting because they'll come back to me if they think what you've written is total rubbish. They will say, is this what you meant? Or actually there were 17 frogs in the study, not 15. So there is like a process of going back and forth to make sure that it's correct. Also, you only know what you know at the time. Sometimes papers get redacted, get withdrawn. So then we write in the article that it's been taken down, or we write something wrong. I mean, we're only human. And then later on realise our mistake and write corrections at the bottom of articles. But we do put processes in place to ensure that doesn't happen too often.
And I guess science is all about figuring out what's right and what's wrong anyway. So I can see how a study would then find some more information to go, actually, what we said then isn't quite right. Or it turns out the protocol that we used then wasn't particularly accurate. So sorry about that.
Well, it's like today I wrote about funnel web spiders. So there was the Sydney funnel web spider is like one of the most deadly spiders in the world. And they did more research on it and discovered that there's actually 3 species. So what they were calling one species that looked quite different individually is actually 3 species, and then those 3 species look quite similar when you take them out, if you see what I mean.
I do. I've always found how they definitely decide that a species is a different species to something that looks very similar, very odd, because to me it seems, and I did do some anthropology at university, but it does seem kind of arbitrary in some cases.
It's usually very tiny morphological differences, and in this case it was tiny morphological differences on the genitalia of these spiders, as well as DNA analysis to back it up. But I thought, I'm not getting that close. If I find one of these, I am off. And but no, it was really interesting. And the thing is, like, we've written previously about the spider because it's quite famous for being quite deadly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what we wrote before was wrong because we didn't know that then.
Yeah, it's how science works. It's an update. Yeah.
I wanted to ask more about this. The spiders, like, do those variations change how deadly it is?
Well, this is the thing. So they have an anti-venom for this spider because people do get bitten, and no one's died since they made this antivenom, which is pretty good. But now that they've separated these species into 3 species, they're going to make, I think the plan is to make an antivenom for like each one, so that like it might have slightly different properties. Like there's nothing wrong with the antivenom they have now, but they could in theory make it better.
Yeah, but I guess if that's some of the sort of the sciencey facts, that you can find ways of figuring out if that is actual science fact or just made up.
I guess, I mean, to be fair, it's probably all made up to an extent,
straightforward.
right? Because they're deciding the categories, they're deciding how related it has to be a new species.
All of it is made up. So it's kind of how much do we agree on, we have a consensus that these are the species we're going to name. For sure, in like sustainability, you kind of go, here's the standard we think you should use. And then someone will go, I don't think that standard really applies for everything, so I'm going to make a slightly different standard based on that standard. Then you don't get a consensus anymore because you can't compare the results between standards.
But I guess there's expert opinion versus like scientific fact or, scientific theories that haven't been disproven. Whereas it depends on how much experience you have to judge whether people should be doing a certain thing, as in sustainability. And those opinions probably exist as a spectrum online, whereas scientific fact is scientific fact. And if you're getting that wrong, you probably shouldn't be talking about that particular science thing. But then there's what we were talking about further up, like learning a new skill, like learning how to fix my bike from looking at a YouTube video. How do you know if you're doing that well? Antonia, you were talking about getting an expert to like look over your shoulder and tell you, whereas I don't like that.
But then I suppose, like, what's the alternative? I guess if you're not fixing your bike well, then you'll know because you won't be able to go anywhere on your bike.
Exactly.
How much does it matter? I suppose if you were plastering
a wall.
Yes, plastering a wall.
Yeah, which needs to be really smooth and I assume has quite a lot of skill involved.
Can you learn that from the internet? Because that would be really handy, because plasterers are expensive.
But again, it depends what is your criteria, like how smooth does it need to be?
Exactly. When I do it myself, I just kind of whack it on there and sand it back a bit, and it's not particularly smooth, but then it didn't really cost me much. If I wanted a really smooth wall, I think I would be going to a skilled person that can do it more quickly than I can.
I suppose it depends on time as well. Like, technically, maybe you could learn to plaster from the internet, but then are you learning to plaster as well as the person that you would have hired to do the job?
I wonder if there are any online courses that an expert will sit and watch you through a camera doing something, and they'll tell you that you're doing it right or doing it wrong, or tell you if you're just like the angle of your wrist or something.
You could have like online lessons for like singing or musical instruments, presumably, and then they would be able to see you doing it and know that you were doing it not as well as you should be, perhaps.
Yeah.
That would probably work better for a musical instrument or, like yoga or something than it would for plastering a wall.
But like a language, you could definitely learn a language online. The internet could teach you a language, I reckon.
This is where I'm like, is it the internet or is it people who have contributed to it? Like, if someone had made all the voice clips and then even made, I don't know, even software to be able to listen back and go, yes, that is accurate enough. You know, it matches the... Yeah. I know how good Duolingo's listening skills are.
I used to get really cross in lockdown because I'd be trying to learn Spanish on Duolingo and you have to say stuff into your phone and then it's like, no, you should have said it better or, more Spanish. And then you find yourself putting on like a really over-exaggerated Spanish accent to try and get the machine to accept it.
Whereas you think a teacher would have just said, yes, that's fine, let's move on.
Or would have said you're doing it too far, wrong, and you should say it like this, maybe.
Right, so you think the teacher's probably better than that AI feedback loop that I guess Duolingo uses?
So. I would hope so.
Is it AI?
I don't know, actually, how Duolingo works. It must be something like that, surely.
I would guess so, if it's listening to what you're saying, listening in inverted commas there, and then giving you feedback. It must have some sort of voice recognising pattern-y thing. Are you saying that's not AI, that's just an algorithm, Antonia?
When I was learning, I can't remember what language, it didn't feel very smart.
Well, some AI, I think, it probably isn't. Depends how well it's been trained.
How much would it matter to a native speaker?
Well, because, there are different accents and things. And it's kind of obvious to a native, got a strange accent, you're not from around there. So yeah, it probably wouldn't matter. I think maybe Duolingo is getting a bit too hung up on you trying to speak like a local.
I was just trying to keep my hearts. That was what really frustrated me about Duolingo. If you get it wrong 3 or 4 times in a row, it takes away all your hearts and you have to wait a time period to replenish them before you can have another go. I was too cheap to play for the premium one, but Oh well, I think if I really wanted to learn Spanish, I probably wouldn't pin all my hopes on Duolingo.
Okay, so this is maybe a Duolingo specific complaint, is that I don't know if its way of teaching was a good way.
It depends what you're trying to achieve. I mean, it's better than nothing, I suppose, but I don't think it's not a substitute for going to like a language school.
No, and to change topic quite a lot, I imagine there are other very specific things that it can't tell you, like, how many VGA cables do I have in my house and why do I still have them? I don't think I have a monitor that would need VGA input.
I think that's an interesting one. I think maybe the internet can't tell you everything about you personally. Like, it doesn't know how many VGA cables you have in your house. It doesn't know, what time you fed the dog or something like that, unless you've shared it.
But what if it had enough data points that it could say, on average, a person of this demographic would have this many VGA cables? And then with a percentage certainty, that's where you fall.
It could have a strong enough guess.
Maybe someone has done a study or crowdsourced this sort of information, because I'm sure I'm not the only person with a stupid number of redundant cables in my house that I should really go and recycle.
I've definitely got a few.
But I guess then that means the internet is collecting like more data and trying to find potentially more sophisticated ways of analysing or processing it to give you something meaningful out of that very strange data set of cable hoarding.
I can't imagine there's that much information on cable hoarding to even train it on, but maybe I'm wrong, maybe there is.
Well, would it be easier to simulate or to actually, I don't know, get a satellite image and try to... How could someone remotely find...
hack into Laura's personal, phone or something and then use the internet to look through and see how many VGA cables you've got lying around? Something like that. Something silly.
Yeah, I hope things don't do that. I guess maybe a slightly more sensible example is, maybe if you try and go back to the sort of the plastering thing, could it come up with some sort of 3D render of you doing your plastering?
Like motion capture.
Oh.
Yes, and it can get a complete 3D wireframe or whatever you would need of you, putting you in a video game almost. And then someone can look at it, or you can make up an algorithm that would say, you're doing this wrong.
But you hate video games.
I know, but for the purposes of this, it could be useful if it can give me meaningful feedback from my 3D model of me plastering.
What if it could project onto the wall exactly what movements you should be making?
Yeah, the strokes. I'm imagining this a bit like Wii Tennis, when it told you what to do, like a tutorial, and you have to wave it over your head left to right and then move it up and down.
Oh, bring back the Nintendo Wii and Microsoft Kinect, right?
See, again, you're losing me because it's a gaming thing.
We're going to make a fortune on our new How to Plaster game. Is going to be a bestseller. If only any of us knew how to plaster in the first place, we might have a better chance.
But there is the saying that if you want to find the right answer on the internet, you post the wrong answer.
Oh, I've heard of this, where you people trying to solve coding problems and stuff.
Or just in general, because people want to prove you wrong.
Oh.
That they'll give you the correct answer.
They love to make themselves look more intelligent than other people.
I guess. Yeah, does that link back to what you were saying at the top about military secrets that were given out when someone was trying to point out whether a game was accurate or not?
Yeah, that is possibly the most extreme example, because people are going to such lengths to prove they're right that they're basically going to lose a job and potentially be barred from other things in life.
Well, it still amazes me that someone would do this, because I work for the United Kingdom National Nuclear Laboratory. The lab itself deals with some quite sensitive information. I don't personally. So caveat that now. Don't come after me asking me where this thing is. But I get told quite a lot, even though I don't handle that information, to be really careful about the information that you are giving out and make sure that the person you're giving it to actually needs to know that. So it genuinely amazes me that someone that knows how a fighter jet actually works would give that information out.
They must have known. How long did it take before they were like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that.
Yeah, maybe they just figured they won't get found out. Why would my organisation be looking at what I do online? Apparently they do quite a lot.
I suppose. I mean, I live in fear of breaking an embargo. We get all these press releases and all these papers from journals, and I think, what if I misread the date and wrote a whole article, had it all fact checked by my team, and we published it before the embargo lifted? I mean, probably realistically nothing that dreadful would happen because it would be like an animal behaviour study and not something groundbreaking. But still, I would just be so embarrassed. More than anything, I suppose.
I guess the company that you work for would probably get fined, and I would also feel awful. Like, similar from the other side of it, from working for UKNNL, where I kind of give out that information, and I sit there thinking, do I really want to press send?
People have like mistakenly published obituaries about people that aren't dead or made mistakes in that way, or like whistleblowing, stuff like that. That's, I guess, more dangerous.
Yeah, sharing news that shouldn't be publicly known.
Yeah. Or like the state secrets and the like fighter jets, I guess. It all comes back to that, doesn't it?
No, I sometimes wonder how much the internet knows about me and how did it get that information. Like, I'm sure you've all had like a call from an unknown number and it's been like complete spam, and you always ask them, well, how did you get this number? Is it on some database somewhere that's been leaked somehow?
I think like it's also what you share as well. Because I was saying, the internet, you couldn't learn what time Laura fed your dog. But if Laura had taken an Instagram story and put it up of being like, just giving the dog his breakfast at 8:30, then we would know that. So then you've freely given that information to the internet.
The more you put on social media, the more people can build up a picture of who you are and the sorts of things that you do.
I guess that you have to be careful what you share, but then at the same time, to an extent, most people are sharing something. If you were going for a job interview or something, you'd probably go on LinkedIn and look up who was interviewing you or the colleagues at the company and all that sort of thing.
Yep. I have internet stalked quite a few people before I met them, partly because I'm also like really terrible with names and faces. So I will literally find a picture of them and have it on my phone and look around the room if it's someone I've never met before and we're meeting in a public place, just so I'm sure that I am meeting the person that I think I'm meeting, because I get hideously embarrassed otherwise.
But I think that's also a good thing, right? Like, you should look them up and see what they're writing and see, especially on a platform like LinkedIn where it is work related. You're not like looking up their personal details to find out where they live or anything like that.
No, and it's information they chose to put out there about what they do. So yeah, I would say that the people that haven't done that, I find it a little bit weird that they haven't internet stalked someone before they met them.
I think we were all probably guilty of more internet stalking than we'd like to admit. Like old people that you know from school, or, people you've lost touch with.
I suppose it started because you wanted some connection or you wanted to prepare for something. So the intentions were there.
Yeah, it wasn't out of malicious intent. It was just, I guess, out of curiosity or preparedness for what they were going to ask you about.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we're all saying we're stalkers. We're not. We're saying we're professionals.
We're just really prepared. We're just conscientious.
Isn't it better to get over some of the information that you should have known? For example, like, what is their relevance to the project that you're going to meet them for?
Yeah. And not what's the name of their dog. Like, probably you don't need to know that.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like we've kind of deviated quite far from what can we learn about science and engineering, and what other useful things could we find on the internet. So maybe that is a good place to leave it on what is, after all, a milestone episode for us. Are we all pretty much in agreement that the internet can be great for learning the theory of a practical task, like bike maintenance or plastering, but it's maybe not so good for some specific science facts unless you know you can trust the source and get away from that waffly stuff that none of us seem to like?
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Cool. So, on that note, we hope you've enjoyed this episode, which has been somewhat factual and somewhat enlightening. We do tend to fact check the things that we say before we say them, so you can trust us that we've said something that is already out there and known and correct. And in that vein, if you've liked listening to us for the last, it's nearly 4 years now for our 100 episodes, please do support us and consider adding some money to our tip jar. We would very much appreciate it, and it would really mean a lot to us to see your support.
And it helps us actually pay for the hosting of the podcast.
Yes, that is very true. It does cost me a small amount of money every year to have all of these episodes online for everyone to listen to. And I would very much appreciate a contribution to those costs. So thank you, and we will see you in the next episode. The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.